Today I want to share with you a master recipe for making medicinal herbal soups. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broth, ferment, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning how to be a modern pioneer in the kitchen, consider subscribing to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. If at any time you want to jump ahead, be sure to check the description below where I'll list the chapter timestamps for everything that I'm going to cover. There'll also be a link to the printable recipe. Now, before I go over the ingredients that we're going to need to make this soup, I just want to mention that although herbs are used for culinary purposes, they also have medicinal properties. So you want to check with your healthcare provider as well as do your own research, especially if you're pregnant, nursing, thinking of using herbs with children, or if you're taking medication, either over the counter or prescription, because herbs can interact with medications, or, and this is one that a lot of people forget about, if you suffer from seasonal allergies that are sort of under that hay fever umbrella, you want to make sure that the herbs you're using are not ones that may create hay fever symptoms in you. So just check with your medical professional, do your research, and make sure that the herbs you're planning on enjoying are ones that are appropriate to your particular situation. And I just want to mention that this master recipe for making medicinal herbal soups is part of a series of videos that I have, and I'll link to the playlist in the description below. And the master recipes that I have for making medicinal herbal remedies include how to make tinctures, how to make teas, how to make oils and salves, how to make herbal syrups. There's a whole host of things that you can make with herbs that can be very comforting to you for various reasons. Alrighty, now let's go over all the ingredients that you're going to need to make this master recipe. Now keep in mind that, as I said, this is a master recipe, so you can have a lot of variations in the ingredients that you put into this soup. And the variation actually comes mainly with what herbs you decide to put in the soup. But to start, what you're going to want to use is about a tablespoon or so of butter and a tablespoon or so of olive oil. It's not an exact science. Don't worry if you have a little less, a little more, it's all going to work out fine. Next, you're going to want some type of potato. Now, I'm using red skin potatoes because I like the contrast of the color of the skin with all of the green that we've got in this soup. I leave this soup in a brothy form. However, as I'll explain at the end, you can also puree this soup and make it more of an herbal cream soup. If you do that, you may want to peel your potatoes or use light-skinned potatoes so that you retain that intense green color of the soup. But whatever potatoes you're going to use, medium-sized potatoes are perfect. Next, you're going to want some soup vegetables. You're going to want something in the onion family. I'm going to use leeks today, but any other type of onion will work well. You can use white onion, yellow onion. You can even use a red onion if you want. Or you can even use spring onions. I've got a few spring onions here because I'm simply going to use these as garnish at the end. Next, you want to have some carrots, and I've just got 3 carrots here. And then next, you're going to want some parsnips if you have them. It's nice, they add a little variation. In a way, they're similar to carrots, but they have some slightly different nutritional profile. So I always like to add, whenever making soups, a variety of vegetables that we may not eat on a regular basis to introduce those nutrients into our diet. So I've got 2 parsnips here. I may only wind up using 1. And again, very flexible here in terms of the amount of soup vegetables that you put into your soup, depending on how brothy or how chunky that you want your final product. But generally, I am going to use all 3 leeks. You may want 1 or 2 medium-sized onions or a nice big large onion. The carrots, I'm going to use 3. I'm going to use 1 parsnip, and then a few stalks of celery. And basically what I'm going to do, actually, rather than pulling off 2 or 3 stalks, I'm just going to chop some up off the top so that I can include the leaves as well. Now that can basically be your base, along with a little, I've got some salt and pepper over here, I've got some fine ground sea salt, and we can grind in some pepper. And that's basically your base. Now, you can add additional flavorings that not only add flavor, but also bring some nice nutrition to the table, so to speak. And here I've got some jalapenos. I've also got some Fresno peppers, who's flying away from me. I think since I'm going with the red skin potatoes, and I'm not going to puree this, I think that I'll probably use just one Fresno. You can add as many or as little peppers as you like, depending on how much spice you like. You can also remove the membrane and the seeds to basically add a lot of flavor, but decrease the amount of heat that it adds to your soup. So you have some options there. Next, I've got a lovely big piece of ginger here. I'm going to add a little ginger in it. Ginger, and also like peppers, bring so much nutrition to soups. They have and they also have a lot of anti-inflammatory properties, antiviral properties, antibacterial properties. So all wonderful things, not only vitamins and minerals, they have a lot of health properties. And so if you're making this herbal soup in the winter, it can be exceptionally healing. Next, you can also add in some greens to your soup, greens that are not necessarily generally classified as herbs, but classified as salad greens. I've got a little arugula here. I love its peppery bite. You can also use kale. You could use Swiss chard. You can even use romaine lettuce. Romaine lettuce is very nutritious. And the only thing you want to keep in mind is, and we'll talk about this a bit when we get to the parsley as well, since parsley falls into the same category, is that some greens, including parsley, are high in something called oxalates, O-X-A-L-T-E-S, I believe, oxalates. And hopefully, I'm the queen of mispronunciation, but I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. But if you're prone to kidney stones and you've been told that your kidney stones were formed by oxalates, then you would want to avoid or go very easy on any type of greens like parsley or like arugula, kale, Swiss chard, that may contain oxalates and irritate your particular condition. So that's always something to keep in mind. However, romaine can always be a nice green to add if you are sensitive to oxalates, since it either doesn't contain or is low in them, I believe. And the nice thing about adding some greens into a soup is if you like to take green smoothies, but you don't like smoothies in the winter, I don't like drinking really cold things when it's cold outside, you in essence can take a green soup in which you've added a lot of greens and a lot of herbs as well that have wonderful healing properties. So you're getting all of that nutrition similar to what you would get in a smoothie, but now you're getting it through a nice warm soup. Also, when it comes to adding nutrition to your medicinal herbal soup, you can also think about adding mushrooms. Now, these are just some baby bellas that I picked up at the grocery store. You can even just add the plain white button mushrooms. If you want to get fancy, you can certainly add all the various gourmet mushrooms that are out there. However, the good news is that mushrooms, regardless of if they're the simple white button mushroom, a baby bella, or your other fancy mushrooms, all contain good nutrition. Are some more nutritious than others? Yes, but the good news is they're all nutritious. Now, the next thing that you're going to need is a good handful, maybe 2 handfuls, a real nice bunch of herbs. And what I've got here is just a general selection. You can add all of one herb, you can add a mixture of herbs, whatever you like, but you want to have a nice bunch. And what I've got here is some fennel. This has kind of a licorice type flavor. You can also add the bulb in. What I've got here is dill. If you like this is wonderful. Now, speaking of dill, I just want to take a minute to talk about, can you use dried herbs? And yes, you can when making this soup, and some herbs lend themselves better to being used in a soup like this when they're dried as opposed to the fresh. Now, dill is one of those that can work very well. And also chives, which we'll talk about in a minute, those can work very well. They keep their flavor and their shape very nicely when they're dried. Tarragon that's been dried can also work very well. Oregano, which we've got here, can work very well. So you definitely can use dried herbs to make this soup. You're just going to be using them in smaller quantities. So as I said, I've got some dill here. I've got some sage. I've got some chives, tarragon, and here I've got the oregano. It's wonderful. And I've got some flat leaf Italian parsley. Over here I've got some rosemary. And I just want to take a minute to talk about the rosemary. Although it's a wonderful stimulating herb, it's excellent for health. It is very strong, and when you start adding strong herbs to soups, you need to go a little easy. Also, you need to keep in mind that to many people, too much rosemary can start to taste soapy in their mouth. So you want to experiment with rosemary starting slowly. Then over here I've got some thyme. This is a wonderful herb. It's fantastic for soups. Also, thyme has many wonderful healing properties. It contains an ingredient, I believe it's pronounced thymol. And if you have a cough or a sore throat, adding some thyme to soup can be very soothing. And then back here I've got some mint, also a wonderful stimulating herb, and can be lovely in a soup. Now, all herbs, as we mentioned, can be used for culinary purposes, but all of them do have medicinal properties. And a lot of them are similar, but at the same time, they do bring different things, in essence, to the healing table, so to speak. And so you want to educate yourself as to all the different properties that each herb offers. And then based on what you're looking for to have in your soup, maybe you're feeling a little under the weather and you're looking for some particular properties that can help you feel a little better, maybe help ease your symptoms, or whatever the case may be. Maybe you suffer from nausea, and so you want some herbs that may help tamp down nausea, or maybe you have a lot of indigestion and you're looking for a soup that may help improve your gastrointestinal health and your digestion. So all herbs bring something different, as well as to a certain extent something similar, to the table, and that's what you want to educate yourself about. And if you're new to herbs, I highly recommend any book you can find by a woman named Rosemary Gladstar. She's been writing herbal books since, I think, probably the 1970s. She's extremely knowledgeable. You can learn a great deal from her, and she has a wonderful book on herbs directed at beginners. And she covers a good handful, I'm not exactly sure, maybe 15 to 20 or so herbs in her beginner's book. And she talks how to grow them, what their properties are, and then how to use them. And I highly recommend that you look into that book. Look at it first to try and find it in your library, which you may very well do since her books are very popular. And then if you find that it's something you want to add to your kitchen library, you can go ahead and do so. And I'll be sure to link to her books in the description below so you can learn more about her. Another wonderful book is called The Herbal Kitchen by Cami McBride. I'll link to that as well. It's a wonderful book, and she covers a whole host of herbs and spices and how they can be used for medicinal properties, or the medicinal properties they have, and how they can be used for medicinal purposes in your kitchen and in your cooking. The last ingredient that you're going to need is the liquid. Now, what I've got over here is 4 cups of a chicken bone broth. In total, you're going to want 8 cups of some type of liquid. But I'm going to do a combination of the bone broth and water. I find all bone broth in the soup is a little overpowering and can kind of overpower the lovely flavor of the herbs. So I like to do a 1-to-1. You could do 4 cups of beef bone broth with 4 cups of water, or you could do all water if that's all you have on hand. This is a very flavorful soup. So the only thing that you would be missing out by just using water are the benefits that bone broth or stock bring to the table. And in the case of bone broth, they're very healing for your gastrointestinal system, help you digest your food well, and help you absorb nutrients. And so I have lots of videos where I show you how to make bone broth, and I'll definitely link to those in the description. So if you've got some bone broth on hand, definitely think about adding some of it as the liquid for this soup. Alrighty, well, let's get cooking and make this medicinal herbal soup. Now to my soup pot, I'm going to go ahead and add in my butter. And normally, if I was doing this on my regular cooktop, I would probably have this on about a medium heat. But I've noticed that this little tabletop burner tends to run hot. So you'll notice that I actually have it set kind of low. But on a regular oven, on a regular stovetop, you probably want to put this at medium heat. And then I'm going to go ahead and put in what I think is about a tablespoon of olive oil. And I know many of you have asked me about this tabletop burner and if I'm happy with it. I am. It works very well and it comes in handy when I'm doing water bath canning if my stove is busy. But as I said, it does run hot, so you have to be a little conscious about that. But it is made by Cuisinart, and I'll link to it below if you want to learn more about it. Now I'm going to move some of these herbs aside as I get ready to prep the soup type the potatoes and the soup vegetables. But the herbs that I'm going to be using for this soup are, especially since I have chicken bone broth, I love tarragon with chicken. So I'm going to use the tarragon. I'm also going to use the chives. I love the onion flavor that they bring. And I've also got some thyme here. Thyme can be a little strong, so I don't want to go overboard with it. I think I'll save the basil, the sage, and the dill for later. And then I'm going to go ahead and also use some flat leaf Italian parsley. So I'm going to go and just move these over here. And I'm going to put these aside. Sage is also wonderful with chicken. It works beautifully. They actually all do. And the rosemary works very well with the beef, but chicken as well. So there's a lot that you can do in terms of experimenting. I also think I'm going to save the fennel, or I'm debating. We might add a little bit of that in. It does complement the tarragon nicely because they both kind of have that little bit of licorice flavor, but I'll just set that aside for now. In any event, what you want to do is start to cut up your potatoes. What's nice about using the potatoes and why I like to put them in this herb soup is that they'll release some starch when they're cooked in the fat, the butter and the olive oil, and that helps give a little body to the soup and also almost, it's not exactly a roux that you're making because we're not doing the flour, but the starch that's released from the potatoes will give the soup a nice consistency so that you don't have a lot of fat floating to the top and having the soup look greasy. I hate when that happens. So the potatoes really help create a nice base for the soup and also to give the soup some body. Basically what I'm doing is simply cutting the potato into little bite-sized pieces. Now I'm just going to go ahead and add in my potatoes. We'll just saute those up a little bit and then we'll add in our soup veggies. So you just want to toss those potatoes around in the butter oil mixture to get them nicely coated and then just let them simmer there for a few minutes while we prepare the rest of our vegetables. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the leeks over to the sink. I'm going to cut off the root, but I'm going to save it because if you've seen my video on growing vegetables from scraps, you know that these are very similar to spring onions, and you can just put this root in water or right in your garden, right, or in a flower pot with dirt, and you can start growing leeks, which is a lot of fun. Now I'm just going to use the lighter color part of the leek, but do not discard these. I have a recipe, which I'll link to in the description, for how to use these leek greens to make one of the most tastiest spaghetti dishes you've ever had. It's easy to make, and you're basically making it with scraps. My leeks are all washed up here, and I'm again just going to slice these into bite-sized pieces. So now I'm going to go ahead and add in my chopped leeks along with the potatoes. And leeks are wonderful. If you've not had them, I highly recommend trying them. And when you have a recipe that calls for an onion, where it's like in a soup or something where you don't specifically need the round shape of the onion, and try some leeks. I think you're going to really like the flavor. And it's a good way to introduce things. I think they're a little more mild than regular round onions, unless maybe you get those sweet Vidalias. They're a good way of introducing folks who maybe generally have thought they didn't like things in the onion family into their diet, because the onion family is very nutritious and has a lot of nutrients that are associated with healing properties. And these things, herbs and onions, ginger, turmeric, things like this have been heavily studied by scientists, and they have found that yes, they do indeed have certain properties that may be beneficial to our health. Now I'm going to prepare my carrots. I'm going to peel them. I just think they look a little more appetizing when they're peeled in the soup, but you don't have to peel them if you don't want to. But if you do peel them like I am, do not throw out these peels. Add these to your scrap bag that you use when you make bone broth. You don't always have to add fresh vegetables or whole vegetables for that matter. You can add scraps, your carrot peelings, your onion skins, little bits and bobs, like the root part of the celery, anything like that. Get it into that scrap bag and definitely add that next time you're going to make bone broth, because all of this is very nutritious. It contains the same and sometimes more nutrition than the actual vegetable itself. And these little bits here on the end, the root, I'm going to add those to my scrap bag as well. Then all I'm going to do, just like I've done with the other vegetables, I'm going to go ahead and cut my carrots into bite-sized pieces. Alrighty, that's coming along beautifully. So as you'll see, I just have the carrots in lovely bite-sized pieces, and now I'm going to go ahead and add that in with I'm going to go ahead and add the carrots in with our potatoes and leeks. The soup is going to be delicious. Once you get your carrots in, just spin all this around, get everything nicely coated in that butter and olive oil mixture. Continue to let that simmer. And now we'll work on the rest of our veggies. I'm going to prepare this parsnip the same way I did with the carrot. I'm going to go ahead and peel this, but I'm going to definitely save these peelings along with my carrot peelings. Now I've got my fennel all chopped into bite-sized pieces, and I'm going to go ahead and add that in to the soup pot with everything else. I'll spin it around a bit, and then we'll add in our celery. Now all I'm going to do with the celery is just start taking some of this right off the top, and then I'll just chop through it a little bit more, just the amount that'll bring, maybe about 2 or 3 stalks worth. And again, I'm just eyeballing this. Basically what you're looking for is to have a soup pot, very generously, a soup pot about this size. I think this is like about 4.5 quarts, generously filled with your vegetable mixture. It's going to be filled probably half to 2/3 full before we add in the liquid and the herbs. And then what I'm going to do is just take my knife, and I'm just going to kind of run through this just to make the celery pieces. Right now they're all basically half moons like this, and I just want to make them a little smaller. Alrighty, well, I've got my celery all chopped up nice. I took the half moons off the top of the celery, and then I just chopped them just a little smaller. I just wanted to get them a little more bite size, but depending on how much chunkiness you want to your soup, you can certainly just slice it off the way I did, and then go ahead and add that right in here. And you'll see my soup pot is about, just about halfway full, and that's perfect. Now I'm going to add in my 2 extra elements. I'm going to put in the Fresno pepper. I am going to remove the membrane and the seeds so that it's not too spicy, but we have some nice flavoring. And then I'm just going to take a small piece of ginger, maybe just about an inch or 2, and I'm going to grate that. I'm going to grate the skin off of it and chop that up. Alrighty, now that I've removed the membrane and the seeds, I'm just going to go and dice this pepper up nice and tiny. Now I'm just going to use a spoon to get the skin off of my ginger. I really like using one of these serrated grapefruit spoons. It works like a charm, and the skin comes off very quickly. I'm just going to go ahead and mince this quite finely. And as I said, it's just a small piece. It adds some nice medicinal properties along with all the herbs. And I'm just making sure to just give it a good mince. If you have one of those little mini choppers, you could even use that. It would make very quick work of it. Already I've got my minced ginger, so I'm going to go ahead and add that into my soup pot along with my finely chopped serrano pepper. And we're going to be, or Fresno, it's not a serrano, it's a Fresno, we'll get all of that into the soup pot. You could also add some garlic if you wanted at this point, or some shallots, whatever you want. You really want to make this your own. But I love the little bit of gingery flavor that this adds, and it complements the herbs so beautifully. Alrighty, now we're going to get ready to add in our herbs. Now, if you were using any greens or if you were using any mushrooms, you would go ahead and add those in now. Alrighty, so the thyme has extremely tender stems to it, so I'm going to leave that on. The chives certainly can go in whole, no problem at all. And let me see how this, the tarragon, the stems are a little tougher, so I'm going to go ahead and just remove the leaves. Now, I'm not going to throw away these tarragon stems. I'm going to add them to my scrap bag. I have multiple ones. I could save that for when I want to make a soup in which I want a little tarragon flavor, but where I've tied it all together and I'm going to pull it out at the end. That's something, or I can just go ahead and add it right into my scrap bag for my bone broths if I feel that it would make for a nice flavor. Alrighty, now what we're going to do is just start to chop up these herbs. Now, if you're going to puree this soup, then you can really just do a very rough chop. But I'm going to try to mince these as finely as possible because I'm going to serve this more as a brothy soup. Now, I am going to go ahead and add in some of these fennel fronds. I think they are going to be a lovely complement to the tarragon. And it smells wonderful. Plus, the nice thing is that the fennel, when it's simmered in soup and when the bulb is cooked, also adds a wonderful sort of a sweetness, a bit of a sweet flavor to soups or any other dishes that you might add them to. So I think this is just going to be a lovely addition. My mother is of Italian heritage, and she used to call fennel, I believe the Italian pronunciation is like finocchio, something like that, and it kind of sounds like Pinocchio. So I always got a big kick out of that when I was a kid. Alrighty, now I'm going to add in some of this flat leaf Italian parsley. It has such a wonderful flavor. And I'm going to cut off most of the leaves, and then I'm going to save the rest for other recipes. I'm definitely not going to discard this. This can be wonderful, especially the stems dipped into a bone broth at maybe like the last 10 minutes, just to add some wonderful flavor and some nutrition. Again, though, if you are sensitive to the oxalates, you just want to be a little careful about that. Alrighty, now I'm just going to go ahead and mince this up best that I can. Well, I've got all my herbs chopped up, so now I'm going to go ahead and add these right into our soup. I've got my wonderful flat leaf Italian parsley that has a lovely flavor. If you've never tried it, it's definitely got a much nicer, sort of more gentle flavor than the curly parsley. I heard someone once describe it as like fresh spring, if spring had a flavor. I thought that was cute. And the nice thing is, if you're making it at this time of year, when the weather is cooler, this is an easier herb to find in season. And certainly if you're making this, when basil during the summer, when basil is growing beautifully, you can add a lot of basil to this. Whatever herbs are in season and that you can eat or easily find. And if you're growing them, great. If not, whatever you can find at your grocery store that's in season. Alrighty, oh, this looks heavenly. Now that I've got my herbs in here, I'm gonna go ahead and add in my chicken bone broth. This is 4 cups. Then I'm gonna go fill this measuring cup up with some water and add that in as well. Now that I've got all of my liquid in here, I went ahead and added the 4 cups of water. I'm gonna turn this up to high. I'm gonna bring this up to a boil, but the minute it comes up to a boil, then I'm gonna turn it down to medium. On here, I'll be turning it to low, since as I said, this runs a little hot. But under typical circumstances, you just want to have this on medium, a medium simmer, nothing crazy, and then you're going to give it cover it up and let it simmer for about 10 minutes and check it at 10 minutes. If the potatoes, the carrots, and the parsnips are tender to your liking, then it'll be ready to serve. At that point, we'll add in the salt. Once we remove it from the heat, I like to use a sea salt, and sea salt is a living food. And so, sorry, it's heating up. And so because it's a living food, it can be easily destroyed by heat that's too hot. So I like to add the salt in at the end once I've turned off the heat. We'll give it a taste, and we can always add some black pepper at that point too, if the Fresno didn't add enough spice. Well, our soup's come up to a boil, and I'm going to turn this down to low. Again, on a regular stovetop, probably a medium low or a medium will be fine. I'm just going to let this calm down a little, since it is an electric burner. If you have gas, you don't have that problem. It'll calm down right away. Then I'm just going to go ahead and put the lid on, and we're going to let this simmer for about 10 minutes. Now, as that's simmering, I just want to mention that if you do tolerate dairy in your diet, this soup is wonderful once plated to be served with some grated cheese on top. You can use a Pecorino Romano or a Parmigiano Reggiano. Both are delicious, but any hard cheese grated on top adds a wonderful taste and just a wonderful touch to the soup. Well, our soup has simmered for about 10 minutes. All the vegetables are nice and soft. The potatoes are nice and soft. The aroma, when you make this herbal soup, you're going to love the aroma that it fills your kitchen with. Now, I'm just going to give the broth a little bit of a taste test just to see how much salt I think that we should add. Oh, that's so tasty. And it's got just a hint of spice from that one pepper. So it definitely doesn't need any black pepper. And it actually doesn't even really need that much salt, because I used a chicken bone broth. And when I make chicken bone broth, I use the carcass of a roast chicken. So there's a lot of seasoning on it to begin with. I don't add any extra salt, but there's already that seasoning there. So I'm just going to go ahead, this may be about a half a teaspoon or so. That's probably all it needs. And I've got that heat turned off, and I'm just going to give this a stir, and then we'll plate this up. I'll show you how it looks, and we'll take a taste with all the herbs in our spoonful. And I've got some flat leaf parsley, the Italian flat leaf parsley here that I've chopped up, and some of the spring onions that I'm going to use as a topping just to give it a little extra punch of color. And as I said, grating some hard cheese onto this, just delicious. Well, I love the beautiful greenish golden hue that all of the herbs give to the broth. And I've put a little bit of a sprinkle of flat leaf Italian parsley on top, a few of the green onions, just to add that fresh element to it. So it's always important to have both fresh and cooked ingredients in any recipe that you serve, because the fresh ingredients are very rich in the enzymes that help you digest your food. That's why you often see people will put some garnish on a hot dish, because it helps with digestion. Alrighty, I've got some broth with some herbs in here. Let's give it a taste and see how it is. Oh, that's delicious. Oh, the flavor of the herbs really come through. And that tarragon along with the fennel, perfect combination, absolutely delicious. Well, if you enjoy making herbal remedies, be sure to click on this video over here, where I have a playlist that includes all my master recipes for making medicinal herbal remedies, including tinctures, syrups, salves, teas, the whole gamut. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country Kitchen. Love and God bless.